is Lori with Peace, Love, and Therapy. I did a video not too long ago about passing and just talked about what that word means, at least to most people, and why it's important to some people. And one of our followers asked how that was related to being non-binary. So that led me to realize that I knew someone I could ask. So this is my friend Erin. Erin is also a therapist, very good therapist. And I think Erin is going to be able to help us answer some of those questions, at least from his perspective. So thanks, Erin, for being willing to do this. Thanks. I appreciate it. See? This is a real thing. I'm going to leave this in here. I, like many other people, struggle at times to get pronouns right. So, really important. Erin uses the pronouns they, their, theirs. So, thank you for letting me know. Appreciate it. So tell me, let's just jump right in. Tell me how you identify. Gender. What's your gender identity?
I identify as genderqueer in a lot of settings because that term I feel like is a really useful cop-out term. That basically to me means that while I see that a lot of people find gender a really useful construct for organizing their own identities, I don't really.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll use the word agender, meaning I don't have a gender, but I don't think that's quite accurate either. I think I have gender of some sort, but I don't think it's a binary gender. Sometimes I use the term non-binary generally. Usually with people that I know and love really well, when they ask what is my gender, I answer, no thanks.
So it's just not something that you need. It's not a label that you need.
Basically.
Yeah. So do you feel like you've always identified this way?
No. For most of my life, I identified as a cis woman. I mean, as a woman before I knew what the word cis was. And I think like 5 years ago, I came out as a binary trans man and started hormones and did some transition.
Sure.
And I think a year or two into that, as my understanding of my own identity and gender and what I believed about gender grew, came to identify as non-binary eventually.
Okay. I guess I want to know how you feel like that's affected your relationships with people, family, friends, your significant other. Has a sort of changing understanding of gender identity, how's that affected those relationships?
I think in some ways, when I came out as a binary trans guy and started hormones, there was a whole range of reactions for people in my life. I have family that, most of my family honestly just kind of went, okay, cool. I guess that's a thing now. Great. So that was cool. They weren't necessarily like super actively supportive, but they weren't like uncool with it in any way. Right. They were just kind of like, all right, whatever, you do you. I think my significant other at the time, my partner at the time was kind of like, well, duh.
Like that was all.
It was kind of one of those moments of like, well, I knew that before you did. And I was like, okay, well, thanks for not telling me and ruining the surprise, I guess. But he's been super supportive the entire time, like very actively supportive. And then I also have like friends in town who were just really confused and didn't understand and didn't know how to ask questions or if it was okay to ask questions. So I got a lot of responses from friends that ranged from like trying to awkwardly engage with me and ask as many questions as possible, and sometimes being like annoyingly persistent about asking a bunch of questions that I didn't really have answers to at the time, all the way to some people kind of just like by default almost cut me out of their lives because they just didn't know how to interact with me anymore and didn't want to say something offensive and didn't know how to ask questions and kind of just faded away.
So it wasn't about not accepting you necessarily. They just, you hear that when someone has someone pass away. And sometimes people pull away a little bit because they're afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing, or they don't know what to say and it feels uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
Which at the time felt a little bit like them being totally unsupportive.
absolutely.
Or like having a problem with it because they just didn't just stop talking to me.
Yeah.
And it felt a bit at the time like they were just abandoning me or giving up and being like, well, I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah.
But I think as time went on and they got used to it, or I don't know, did their own research or something, most of them came back around and were like, hey, we should hang out sometime. It's been a while. And I've been like, yeah, it's been 2.5 years. So maybe we should get some coffee.
Yeah.
So
sounds like you've been open to reconnecting now.
Well, for the most part, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the specific questions from our follower was about, I was using the word passing, which we know is okay with some people and other people not so much, but using that idea of passing when you identify as non-binary. Is that a word that has meaning to you, or how does it work?
Passing is a complicated topic because I feel like what passing means to a lot of people is, am I passing means, am I meeting society's expectation of what my gender should look like?
Right.
Or to some people it means, can I get away with saying I'm this gender without anybody questioning me? Can I hide the fact that I'm trans? A lot of times is what it means. Right. And that feels problematic to me in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Because it's the sense of, am I meeting someone else's expectation for my gender? But passing, I think, is especially complicated for non-binary people because there are no societal expectations for what we look like.
Beyond
at least on the society at large, because most of society at large doesn't know we exist.
Right.
So they don't care what we look like. So it's hard to know how to pass for non-binary. I can't, in any way, ever walk around in the world and have people assume my gender is what it actually is. Because people don't know that my gender exists. Right. So no matter what I look like, people are going to misgender me. So partly it's that passing isn't really possible.
If some people think that you're supposed to look androgynous.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that really works, but
I think actually within the trans community, and especially within the non-binary trans community, there can be a lot of pressure for folks who are non-binary to present in ways that make people confused about their gender, or make it really hard to figure out what their gender is, or what their gender was assigned at birth anyway. Right. So there is this idea, I think, that like being non-binary means you're totally androgynous or like ambiguous. Which on the first hand, like I feel like is really hard to pull off for a lot of people. Sure. Like an androgynous look is hard to pull off always. Yeah, like people are always going to like swing one way or the other, guessing what gender you are.
Right.
So to really keep in that middle ground where people are always kept guessing is really difficult.
That seems pretty confining.
It takes a lot of effort. I don't have that kind of energy for it, honestly. Yeah. And also, I feel like if part of the point of my exploring my gender in the first place is to be more comfortable in myself and in my body, then trying to live up to this entirely new and difficult set of expectations about my gender doesn't actually do that for me. Like when I'm most comfortable in my body, when I present the way that makes me feel comfortable, I mean, it's mostly a lot like this. So I end up looking like a dude most of the time.
Yeah. Is there some, like, I think you've said to me before, there's safety in that in a way. Just being perceived as a cis male.
Yeah. Oh, that's complicated too. Yeah, no, I think it's a complicated matter because it's always going to be safer in our society, I think, to be perceived as a man than it is to be perceived as anything else. Yeah. Just because of misogyny. In our society.
Yeah. But that's not your goal. I mean, I've heard you say that. That's not.
Sometimes it is, though. Is the thing. Okay. Solely based on my identity and how I want to express my identity, no. I don't actually want to look like a man. Right. It's not a goal of mine. I don't care. But sometimes I do present in ways that I know will be taken as, actually most of the time, I present in ways that I know will be taken as male. Because that's safer for me, because that makes more sense to people, because it brings up less questioning about it. Because for me, I feel like, we've talked about dysphoria a bunch.
Yes.
The dysphoria that I experience around my physical traits a lot of times, at least now that I'm on hormones, is less distressing for me than walking around the world and getting constant questions about my identity and people constantly invalidating my identity and people fighting with me over pronouns and all of that mess.
Right.
Like that's more stress for me than just putting up with the slight dysphoria that it might cause me to present in a way that's very normally masculine.
Right. So if you're not really that invested in maybe even the way other people perceive you in a way, right, in clothing or what that kind of thing is not so important, then why transition? Because when you're saying hormones, I'm perceiving that as part of transition.
Mm-hmm. So like, why go on hormones?
Yeah.
It's a good question. And actually, like, there's a huge variety within the non-binary community of like, and within binary trans folks too, about whether or not people take on different aspects of like medical or physical transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reasons for it are very individual for people. For non-binary folks, I feel like while it's not about, I need to make my body look this certain way because that's what men look like, or because that's what women look like. For some people it is. For some people it's like, I was assigned female at birth and going on testosterone will make me look a little bit more androgynous, and that's what I'm going for because that's closer to my identity.
Right.
For me, I feel like a lot of my discovery and like beginning to explore my gender was not around some just like vague sense that my gender was wrong. It was a lot more around a sense of I want my body to look different than it does.
Okay.
It was around a sense of my body doesn't feel like mine and I can't inhabit it.
Right.
And going on testosterone did things to my body that made it feel more like me, made it feel more like mine, and made it more possible for me to really inhabit my body. And made it possible for me to be more present in the world. And that was important to me. And the things that did to my body make me appear very male. And so when I walk around the world, people assume I'm a man.
Right.
And because I don't care that much, I'm like, fine, assume I'm a man. It's irritating.
Sure.
And it is erasing and invalidating sometimes.
Sure.
But it also is better for me than walking around in the world and being perceived as a woman.
Okay. So that's sort of the overall goal. Like if you're looking at the trans umbrella about why people transition is to find, right, some space that feels more like me, right? It's just that drive to feel more like you. So whatever you need to do to get there, just whatever the label is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to ask about is sort of the atmosphere within the trans community, right? Trans umbrella would be non-binary people who are, trans male, trans female, right? In that whole umbrella, and gender fluid. There's several people in that umbrella, right? How do you think? What's their perspective about someone who's non-binary? What perspectives have you heard about that?
Like from the trans community as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
I think it varies a lot.
Sure.
I think when you get like specifically within non-binary community, non-binary folks have this great opinion of themselves. Like sometimes they have this opinion of themselves that they're like really the only real trans people. Like that gender,
they're enlightened.
Right. Like gender is fake, and we all know that gender is a social construct, and all of you are just like all these binary trans folks are just like, giving up one gender just to be the other because they have to conform to some stereotype, so it might as well be the other one. There is this like very dismissive attitude towards binary trans folks sometimes, I think.
So I think that's sort of similar to I identify as pansexual, and so I kind of have the idea that what does gender have to do with sexual attraction, and why do people think that's a thing? And I've had to accept that really is a thing for some people, right? They really have attractions and gender as a part of that.
Right.
But it's not my experience. And so sometimes I can feel a little like, I just haven't figured it out yet,
right.
Yeah. And I know that's not a real thing, but I have moments of that where I have to go, okay, that's not the thing. So it sounds like a similar idea.
No, it is. And like, as far as sexual attraction, I identify as queer, I think in a lot of the same ways that you identify as pansexual.
Yeah.
With this sense of, like, gender doesn't really have to do with my attraction to people. Like, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of other things that I'm attracted to about somebody that's not usually about their gender. Right. Sometimes it's about the way they do gender. Sometimes people, like, how people play with and present and, like, explore their gender is attractive to me.
Oh, sure.
But not because of their specific gender identity. And I don't have categories of genders that I'm attracted to or not attracted to on a blanket statement. And yeah, there is this sense of like, that's really the right way to be.
Yeah. So
and everyone else is just like cutting out like whole categories of people of like people they could date for no reason. That's ridiculous.
And sometimes people have the idea that so you're just attracted to everyone. No. I have certain types of people I'm attracted to.
Right.
You know, I have certain
preferences. How I categorize the people I'm attracted to and the people I'm not.
It's not by gender.
It's just a very different like rubric that you use.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So I can see how there'd be some of that attitude if you're non-binary. It sort of feels a little enlightened and right. Maybe you've got it figured out. You know, I relate to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's totally dismissive towards other people and really invalidating and terrible.
Oh, of course it is. I don't know if that attitude is something to be proud of. It's just something that comes up and you have to sort of process it and say, oh, no. Yeah. That's probably not where I want to be.
Well, and I think there's kind of a parallel thing that goes on. I think there is some tension a lot of times within the trans community between binary trans folks and non-binary trans folks because, you know, non-binary people sometimes get this kind of almost elitism about being non-binary. And also, there's this fear from binary trans folks that we hear about sometimes that, like, you know, we've just gotten this, like, tiny bit of recognition and validation from the cis community that, like, we can be the genders we say we are, but only because we're doing it this specific way. And so when these non-binary people come around and start making up genders right and left, like, they're just making us look bad. And so there is this sense of, like, non-binary people are fake trans people, and they're making the real trans people look bad, and they're threatening our legitimacy with the wider society.
Right.
And so there is this fear of, okay, but we've just barely gotten a little bit of acceptance, and they're going to take it back if they know that you're trans too. Like, it's just going to paint the whole trans people community
it's kind
in
of
a bad light.
A way of being transphobic in the trans community. People who are trans sort of having their own specific transphobia. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So this is something I didn't say that I was going to ask you, but I'm going to ask. Since you're a therapist, as a therapist, what do I need to know about working with someone who's non-binary, and particularly if I'm working with their family or their significant other? Are there things that I should really be considering that might be different than if I'm just working with someone, for instance, who's trans on the binary, trans woman or trans man?
Ooh, so many things. I think it's useful to know that, I mean, you're aware of this already probably, but there is often a sense of hesitance from trans folks towards mental health professionals in general. Yes. So people a lot of times are already a little bit worried that you're not going to, like, accept them or believe them about their gender, and definitely that you're not going to understand it or have done any of your own research or actually know anything about it. Right. And that's even binary trans folks to begin with. Non-binary folks, I think that's like 10 times more. Like,
it's a whole other layer of you're not going to get it. Yeah.
I've had non-binary clients come to me who know that I'm trans, and that's part of why they're coming to me. Right. Because they at least have this sense of, well, this person's going to get it a little bit. Right. But they know that I'm trans, and so they assume that I'm a trans man, and they assume that I have a binary identity, because this is what I look like. Right. And they'll come to me and tell me that they're some kind of binary trans identity, and then not actually come out to me as whatever non-binary identity I actually identify as for months. Like, at some point it'll come up down the road. Right. Because they're going to assume that if they present to me as a binary trans person, then they're going to be more legitimate, even to me. So I think especially for other therapists who don't have that kind of, like, you know, default, like, in to the trans community, where people will automatically trust you just a little bit. Yeah. I think it's important to do a lot of your own research and understand it, so that they can trust you, not so that they can just feel like they trust you, but so that they can actually trust you, and to be as explicit as you can and do as many things as you can to make it clear that it's okay for them to identify however they identify. Right. And by that I mean things like, you know, ask people their pronouns, even if they tell you that they're trans. Right. Even if they say I'm a trans guy, say, okay, what kind of pronouns do you use?
I often introduce myself to new clients and say, and these are my pronouns, because then I feel like I'm more likely to get a response back from them what their pronouns are. And I try it on like my intake paperwork too. I've made some changes to try to, because I don't think that I was really considering, I work mostly with trans people, but I wasn't really thinking about the non-binary client. And I felt like that was a whole hole that somehow I couldn't see. It was a blind spot. So I'm trying to, even in that way, like you said, ask for pronouns, make sure that my, whatever forms they're filling out allows for that designation. And I've even been asking people, more directly where they feel that they fall in their identity instead of just making it so binary.
Well, and and when I ask now, having learned some things in my training, when I'm asking people about gender identity, a lot of times, even if they say, I identify as a trans man or a trans woman, I'll say, okay, what does that mean to you?
Yes.
Or I'll ask about, like, do you feel like, I'll ask questions about
what's your experience?
How binary is that identity for you?
Right.
Things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's what I always, if someone will sometimes ask my advice about, how do I figure out about their identity, and I don't want to be rude, and I don't want to be too direct, and I'm like, it's always appropriate to ask, how do you experience that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
How does that play out in your life? Like, I think we need to know that with every client, no matter where they are, and,
Yeah.
even if they're a cisgender person, how do you experience your life? How do you, I'm in a committed relationship. What does that mean?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe even more important when we're trying to loosen up this idea that there's a binary and really consider everybody. So.
Yeah. That's a big part of, that's a basic one thing that I would say.
Okay.
There are 100 other things I want to say, but I don't even know where to start.
No, it's good advice. I appreciate it. Well, I appreciate you being willing to, show up and be on video and help our followers kind of understand a little more about this. I certainly didn't want to give a talk about something that I don't feel like I really have done all my homework on, and I haven't had a lot of clients who are non-binary, and I haven't kind of had experience with that. So I thought it was important to talk to someone who not only they identify as non-binary, but they're a professional, so they can also see it sort of from a professional standpoint. So thank you, Erin. I appreciate it.